Today's podcast is brought to you by Audible. Get a free audiobook download and a 30-day free trial at www.audibletrial.com/cinematary. This gives you access to over 180,000 titles to choose from on your iPhone, your Android, your Kindle, or MP3 player. Right now, guys, I am reading a series you would not believe. It is called the Fractured Fairy series, and I'm reading book 1 on Audible. Book 1, Box of Frogs. So, Box of Frogs. Let me just summarize this real quickly for you. Now, remember, this is a 9-hour audiobook that you could be listening to right now if you've signed up through the Cinematary thing, but that's a whole other thing. Let's talk about the summary of Box of Frogs. So, one corpse, several bizarre-looking attackers, some very strange magical powers, and a severe bout of amnesia. Madrona is not having a good week. I mean, are we ever? It's going to be okay, though. All she has to do is find out who she really is, protect a soap star from being attacked by a stalker, and work out why so many people seem so afraid of her. Because surely she's a good person, right? I don't know where the frogs work into this, but there's going to be, I bet there better be a box of them. There hasn't been a box of them yet. After this, there's a lot of other good ones. There's Here Be Sexist Vampires, which sounds like something. Summon the Keeper, Wraith, Natural Witch, Slouch Witch. I guess she has bad posture. I don't know. But you can find all of these and more on Audible. Again, you can get a 30-day free trial by going to www.audibletrial.com/cinematary. That's www.audibletrial.com/cinematary, or clicking the link in the description. Now, onto the show. Welcome to episode 202 of Cinematary. I'm your host, Zach Dennis, and I'm here with
Dylan Moore
and Jessica Carr.
And in today's episode, we will be talking about movies that we saw this week in part 1, and in part 2, we will be continuing our Young Critics Watch Old Movies series with 1955's Pather Panchali, and we are happy to be joined again by Girish Shambu. He has come on the podcast previously, but he wrote about the Apu trilogy for the Criterion Collection, and it's a good chat. So definitely stick around for part 2 as we continue that series. But let's go ahead and jump into movies that we saw this week. And Jessica, I'm going to start with you. You saw a new release, and that is Hearts Beat Loud. So give us that indie swag, indie song, whatever.
Oh, okay. So it's really funny because I went on just like a day trip to Asheville, and I was like, you know what would be great driving 2 hours away? I should just go watch a movie, which I literally could have done in Knoxville, but it just felt like the right thing to do. But anyways, so I saw Hearts Beat Loud, which is directed by Brett Haley. And the plot is it's in a hip Brooklyn neighborhood where a single dad and record store owner Frank is preparing to send his hardworking daughter Sam off to college while being forced to close his vintage shop. Hoping to stay connected through their shared musical passions, Frank urges Sam to turn their weekly jam sessions into a father-daughter live act. This is such a long plot summary. So basically, a single dad is like trying to save his record store, and his daughter is going off to college, and he like really wants to have like these jam sessions with her. He puts one of their songs on Spotify and it blows up. And so the whole movie, the conflict of the movie is him trying to move on and trying to save his record store and like figuring out if, he's trying to hold on to the past and the present, and she's just wanting to move on to the future. She wants to go to medical school. She wants to be a doctor. And so that's pretty much the conflict in the movie. But like, I thought that this was a really sweet movie. Not super like complicated in what it was trying to do, but I think the beauty of it is how simple the story is and how simple the message is. Ted Danson is in it, and he kind of delivers what I believe is the theme of the movie, which is people just have to adapt to their circumstances. So you have Nick Offerman, who plays the father, and Kiersey Clemons plays Sam. And their relationship is the central relationship in the film. And then you have a super cute subplot with Kiersey Clemons and Sasha Lane from American Honey, which is just beautiful. Like, if the whole movie was just their relationship, I would still be totally into it. And, like, one of the things that was very weird, like, I like Nick Offerman in this role, because he adds, you know, he has really good comedic timing, and I think that he adds a lot to it. But honestly, like, I think that the film should have been told from the daughter's perspective, because I thought that she was a more interesting character than the father. Like, I understand what they were trying to do with that, because he is the one that is having a hard time moving on. So, like, I understood what they were trying to do with that, but at the same time, like, I thought that the daughter was a much more interesting character. You also have Ted Danson, who plays, like, the bartender / his friend, and then Toni Collette is kind of an unnecessary character who she has, like, a weird subplot with Nick Offerman as, like, a love interest, but it doesn't really work out because she's also his landlady. Like, she also owns the record store that he's leasing, and so that whole thing is kind of weird and muddled and unnecessary. But she does,
so it's You've Got Mail.
like, she does sing karaoke, and she sings Bruises, which was I really enjoyed that part in the film. So the other thing is the music in the film, which is really good. Like, they're very catchy indie songs, and they do, I mean, the heart of the film, heartbeats. The heart of the film is in the music, because, I mean, the movie is communicating its themes through the music and through the songs. And so I feel like it's trying to have a John Carney thing where it is, you know, you're bonding with the characters through the songs and through the music, but it doesn't quite land like a John Carney film does. I feel like his characters are more realized, and I feel like the songs are kind of better too. But I feel like it was trying to be a John Carney film, and it didn't quite reach that level. But it was still super sweet, and like I teared up by the end of the song. So like they play together a set in the record store, and it was a song about just like packing up all your things and moving on, and like it hit home for me because I'm in a place where like I'm moving soon. And so it was just very effective that way. But I can see how other people might not have connected with that. Like, it had to be like a personal thing that you connected with. So I feel like 2018 has been a really good year for rom-coms and just super sweet movies. I feel like with everything that is happening currently, like, nobody wants to sit in a theater and feel dread. Like, they're kind of using it as an escape to just find a happy place for a little while. And I think that this movie is really effective at doing that.
That does not fit into our conversation about First Reform from last week.
No, although I do like First Reformed, I think that is a good movie too.
It seems like this movie is kind of one of those that is hit with that label where it's like the typical indie comedy thing where it hits these beats that people have seen 1,000 times, and it seems like that you feel it's a little bit, it brings its own unique flavor rather than just being this by the book standard indie, you know, comedy or whatever.
Yeah, I mean, I think the subplot with Kiersey Clemons and Sasha Lane, like, I have never really seen that be front and center in a movie like this, because it's you have people of color, and it's exploring like different sexualities and stuff like that. I don't think that that's something that we've really seen before in movies like this, like where it takes front and center.
Well, Hearts Beat Loud, it's in theaters now, so you know, check it out. I guess if you wanna have your heart beat loud.
Yes.
On a whole other side of the spectrum, I got two movies I wanted to talk about. The first one is an early film by Akira Kurosawa. Actually, I believe it's his one of his first films after World War II that he directed, and that is No Regrets for Our Youth. It came out in 1946. It's also the only one of his films, allegedly, that has a female protagonist. It's also the second film, or one of two films that he did with Setsuko Hara, the muse of Yasuhiro Ozu. But this one, it takes its plot from kind of loosely from two real-life incidents that happened in Japan in the 1930s. The first is a university professor being branded as a communist and being fired, leading to some protests by students because he opposed the militaristic government. And the second is one of that professor's students being later accused of espionage and executed. And pretty much the plot of the story is it picks up in 1933, and a lot of the main characters are the students at the Kyoto Imperial University, and they are protesting the Japanese invasion of Manchuria. And Yuki, who is the Setsuko Hara character, her father is a university professor who is let go after he expresses anti-militaristic views, and it sparks all of these student protests, specifically from these two of his students, Noj and Itakawa, who kind of have this love triangle with Yuki. And one of them, Noj, ends up getting arrested and spends 4 years in jail, while Itakawa ends up becoming a prosecutor for the government. And it picks up a couple years later where Noj has just recently got out of jail, and he has dinner with the family, and Yuki just feels this kind of disconnect from him as a person. If it continues to fast forward a couple years into the future, with Yuki deciding that she wants to leave home in Kyoto and work in Tokyo, and she's kind of floundering between various jobs trying to get some sort of work going, and she ends up running into Itakawa in the city. And he talks about how Noj is actually in Tokyo as well, and she kind of decides to reluctantly reconnect with him, and they eventually become very fond of each other and spend several years together, and they ended up getting married. But she learns kind of that he is doing these dangerous and illegal activities. He's working on stuff that seems like he constantly is referencing that he at any time could be gone because of the work that he's doing. And so eventually he does get arrested, and Yuki is interrogated and put in prison for a number of days, and then finally Itakawa is able to free her. But by that time, they learn that Noj has died while in prison, and so she is crushed, and so she decides to head out into the country and spend time with and live with his family. His family hasn't heard from him in over a decade, and it's his mother and father. His mother, I forgot the actress's name, but his mother is played by if you've seen Tokyo Story, she's the sister who's also the hairdresser, who's incredibly mean to the parents. Yeah, but she's much nicer in this role. Yeah. But it's her and her husband, and they are just they're struggling because the whole town is just constantly, relentlessly just all over them because their son has been convicted as a spy, and they're traitors, and so they work this rice field, but it's not going very well because they can only work at night when people are asleep and not messing with them. And so finally, Yuki works with them to kind of try to overcome all of those hardships and kind of find a purpose for herself. And as somebody who's seen pretty much all of Setsuko Hara's films with Ozu, this was actually before she started doing stuff with Ozu, and you could kind of tell why he probably was drawn to using her as his lead actress, especially kind of giving her own trilogy of films, because she has those she just has, especially compared to the Ozu movies, this one allows her to really display her range. She goes from being kind of a coy, naive schoolgirl at the beginning to having to face the imprisonment of her friend and kind of disillusion of her friend group and her father losing his job, and then going out and having to work in the city by herself for a number of years, and then being married and then having that stripped away and trying to find some purpose in life. That kind of seems to be the driving force. She's constantly trying to find that thing that keeps her motivated, that keeps her wanting to strive for more. And it's really it's a little moving at the very end of the film, because she finds it in this social work and on this local level. That's kind of nice. But the thing that really struck me about this film is, like I said, it's pretty early on after World War II, and Kurosawa, we talked, Dylan, I think a couple weeks ago, when we talked about Stray Dog, we talked a little bit about these Japanese directors and how they grappled with the kind of the post-war, with Kurosawa and Ozu and Mizoguchi. And this one is, especially compared to some of the other Kurosawas I've watched so far, it's pretty overtly political. It's not trying to hide it at all. I mean, and it's so strange to see this, because this is 1946, and for the most part, you're watching Japan develop into this power that we know it turned into during World War II, and then you're having to follow this character who is going against the empire for a number of years, and then is marked a traitor, and only until the end of the movie he's kind of vindicated, and the whole family is vindicated. And I don't know, it just seems to me like such a striking movie to make so quickly, so close to having this event happen, to do a movie that's challenging that just seems insurmountable. I don't think I could see something like that today. And so it wasn't the best movies out of the Kurosawas that I've watched so far, but Satsuko Hara's performance is just so it's just really incredible. You can see why after this she would move on to Tokyo Story and Late Spring and Early Summer and a number of the other Ozu films, and why he probably caught her in this, because she does have that I love how she's able to reserve and bottle her emotions, and she kind of has this simmering effect where you can feel the emotions kind of simmering under the surface, but she's able to keep this stationary level composure, and it's incredibly moving and incredibly effective for this story. It's kind of a strange movie. It bops around a little bit. They have this montage that was happening at the beginning as they're trying to kind of show these student protests happening, that I didn't find all that effective. I could feel Andre Bazin kind of like rolling around in his grave as they tried to tell the story of these protests through these kind of hackney montages. But there are these kind of moments of emotion and of purity that Satsuko Hara finds, that it feels very different from the Kurosawa, I feel like, that we know from Toshiro Mifune and a lot, because the night before I had watched Drunken Angel, and it was very different. It was very different in terms of the subject matter, and so if this is the only movie that he had a female protagonist for, it's disappointing, because I would have loved to see him have more films with Satsuko Hara, which really, all I'm saying is they need to have more movies with Satsuko Hara. That's she's amazing. But yeah, it's on Filmstruck if you want to check it out. It's a really interesting movie. The other one I want, go ahead.
Yeah, to your point about the censorship boards, that immediate transition from, Japanese imperialist, a propaganda machine that they wanted to get out films that Kurosawa was in the middle of. And then immediately to American and foreign censorship boards that he had to then go tackle with until I think even the late 50s that got a lot looser. So yeah, that's really interesting.
Yeah,
time period.
It's just I don't know. In our current political landscape, it's just interesting to see a movie that just wholeheartedly really explores the different shades of a of a rise in government that you can feel the a generation kind of being a little bit reticent against, and the shifts in ideology that young people have from their more idealistic college days to growing up and becoming more assimilated in the workforce, and kind of how they shift, and how while they were kind of radicalized while in college, they have this shift because they have this 9-to-5 job and a family, and the priorities change. It was kind of interesting in watching Setsuko Hara's character battling kind of against the current with that. The other movie I want to talk about is another one, really poking at the political nature of countries. This one is from 1979. It's called Americathon. It's by Neil Israel. He directed a number, I think Police Academy and a couple other comedies. And this one actually came out a couple months before Airplane, and it kind of has that very quick natured delivery of jokes. It's kind of trying to rapid fire jokes at you, but it didn't really land because the satire is pretty thick, and there's really no holds bar. It's a movie that when I saw it with a group yesterday, they described it as it would not fly, and you can just see it would not fly in 2018. There's parts that are just deeply offensive and just kind of lacks the understanding of gender and racial politics that we have today. But there's parts of it.
Zach, what is this movie about?
There's parts of it that are pretty effective. So Americathon, it takes place in 1998. At this point, America has lost the gas industry. Nobody's driving any cars anymore. They're actually using them as like housing units that people live in, and they're riding bikes and walking, and that's how they get around town. There's the opening of the movie shows all these people riding bikes and running on like a freeway in Los Angeles. It's kind of funny as the Beach Boys plays. But pretty much the plot is the president is played by John Ritter, and he is Chet Roosevelt, who's elected because people saw the Roosevelt name and thought that he was part of the Roosevelt family, and so he'd bring America back, and he has no relation to the other Roosevelts, so so he is the president, and I'm pretty sure he's spoofing California Governor Jerry Brown. He's this very zen, laissez-faire, just kind of going with the flow personality. I love the little small details of this, how they've moved the White House from Washington to Los Angeles, and it's in this like hotel complex, and they have the cabinet meeting, and they're all in like this kind of living room space, and they all have these name tags that say, "Hi, my name is so and so," and then their job title. And so pretty much the John Ritter's president has borrowed $400 billion from this very wealthy Native American chief who now wants the money back. He's like, I'm giving you 30 days to pay back the $400 billion. And so initially they wanted to do a raffle and raffle off like the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier and other American artifacts, but instead, they bring in this young TV consultant who says we should organize a telethon. And so they decided to run a telethon for 30 days. Harvey Korman plays this washed up movie actor who is brought in to be the host, and he's constantly popping pills in order to because he thinks that this is going to be his chance to get back in the movies. You have this array of different cameos. Meatloaf shows up at one point. Jay Leno shows up at one point. Elvis Costello shows up at one point. Fred Willard plays this cabinet member of the president who is trying to double cross him and use the America's telethon that's going to fail so that he can help this group. And just bear with me. Just remember, this is part of the plot. In this movie, Israel and Palestine and all of the other countries in the Middle East have banded together because they they all realize that they just love female butts. And so they've all bonded over this trait and created this unified Middle Eastern conglomerate that is beginning to take over different parts of the world. And so they want to use this whole situation to buy America.
Has nothing to do with OPEC or anything. It couldn't. No, it's about butts.
It's about they just love blonde women also.
Okay.
So,
sure. Uh-huh.
So yeah, it's like I said, it's a deeply just misguided movie in terms of 2018 politics at many times, but there's something kind of charming about John Ritter's president, who's playing this very, like I said, this very zen, goes with the flow. He has this little side assistant named Jerry that he's always calling for. It kind of reminds me of like like Dr. Evil and Mini-Me and in the Austin Powers movies. Like, he's constantly has Jerry around. Like, there's a scene where he's having sex with his wife, and she like leaves the bed, and as she leaves the bed, the camera's panning over, and Jerry's like sitting there right there, and he's like starts talking to Jerry. His performance is off the wall. Harvey Korman kind of just plays into his wheelhouse as this unhinged TV host. He's doing all of the Harvey Korman stuff that you're used to seeing. Meatloaf has this insane cameo as this daredevil who, in order to get the people going, they bring out a car and he fights the car with like different weapons. Jay Leno plays this character who is upset with his mom, and she calls him poopy pants, and they box it out, and she kicks him in the nuts, and that's how she defeats him. It's just, there's a lot of stuff happening in this. I don't know if all of it hits. Telethon. There's just this deeply offensive Vietnamese singer character that Zane Busby plays that is just, it should have been offensive in 1979, much less 2018. But yeah, it I don't know. It has its moments where it's just it creates this like strange dystopian America that is somewhat unlike most dystopian Americas that you think of. That it's one of those where just kind of the interactions between the political figures rings true to today, and even in like 1998 and 2000. And it's definitely a precursor to Mike Judge's Idiocracy. But yeah, I don't know where you could find it. It's kind of it's very much out of print for the most part, but it's a strange one. It's weird.
How did you watch it, Zach?
I watched it with the Psychotronic Film Society here in Savannah. They had a copy of it.
Gotcha. Okay.
Yeah, but no, if you can track it down, it's I don't know. If you want to just watch a zany political satire that's, constantly threading and going over the line of offensiveness, then it's there for you. I don't know.
Well, it sounds like Yeah, if it has the structure of a telethon, I'm sure it'll be pretty exhausting.
It's only like 86 minutes. It's pretty short. It moves pretty quickly. I don't know. I liked it just because it does have these moments that are really kind of funny because they're just so absurd and so like poorly done. I don't know. It's a fun one. Americathon. But Dylan, you had a movie you wanted to talk about.
All right, yeah. On a even another different note, I watched. Let's see, when did it come out? It was 1973 movie called Spirit of the Beehive. It by director Victor Arise. He, I don't know what other movies he did. How many movies, but this one is like a solid 97 minutes long, and it's set during the tail end of the Spanish Civil War, the Franco-led government taking over the leftist government previous. And it's set in a small town, just kind of out of the way. It doesn't really seem like it's impacted much by the war. The only thing that comes in from the outside is a delivery truck and a train. And basically the inciting incident of the movie is they finally get a copy of Frankenstein, and they all go to like this local auditorium area that gets set up as a cinema to watch Frankenstein. And it kind of focuses in on two sisters, Anna and Isabel, and it just follows basically their transformation of like overlaying Frankenstein on the rest of their life. It's not the most quiet movie I've watched, but it happens so not quite a slow burn, but the transformation that happens with Anna and between Isabel and Anna, that it doesn't come out of nowhere, but it just kind of seeps into you. They try to figure out what Frankenstein is about when they have no one else to talk to but themselves. Their parents kind of leave them alone. They kind of do their own things. The dad is kind of wrapped into the titular Beehive situation where he kind of runs his own beehive and kind of goes out and I think does lectures outside of town. And the mom is kind of wrapped into a long-distance love affair with somebody that she sends and writes letters to. And at one point, they just get left alone with the nanny that just kind of goes and does other housework in this mansion. And it's so eerie and quiet in this sleepy town that everything kind of feels like it happens on the fringes. And when Frankenstein really gets incorporated into the plot, it's very much a surprise. And the cinematography by Luis Cuadrado is very beautiful. The countrysides, you don't think it's going to spook you, but it's just so beautiful that you kind of mesmerizing and you fall into it, and you just don't quite know where the other shoe's going to drop in the movie. It kind of takes you in, and I'm talking around a lot of the plot points that follow because I feel like it would just ruin the feeling of that movie. So I would definitely recommend it, though, as a very good 90-minute movie.
I'm curious because this one has kind of been on the fringe of being one of our Young Critics picks.
Oh, okay.
I think both like the last 2 years now. So I mean, is there something that you could as kind of a selling point that you would recommend people, next year when we're voting to consider this one?
Probably the fastest thing I could say is that it's one of Guillermo del Toro's favorite movies, like very specifically as a point of inspiration for what it sounds like just about everything he's done. I could see it definitely an inspiration for Devil's Backbone and Pan's Labyrinth, not just because of the setting, but because he specifically sets the POV of the movie from a child's point of view. And the main child in this movie, Anna, played by Anna Torrent, she's just so cute and adorable, and just it is ridiculous how much like her eyes pick up. Like it's just like every small movement is like in wonderment, and it's spooky in a very sad kind of way. It's like eerie because you're waiting for like the war to come in because it's just about over, but there's like no direct impact on this one city that's just isolated in like, I think, northern Spain. And it's just surprising. You're like, well, what do you mean when the war impact the whole landscape? But it just kind of just get little hints of it. And it kind of like upends, at least from Anna's point of view, by the end. And it's a trip. So I'd recommend it.
Cool. Yeah. It might be on the ballot next year because I'm pretty sure it's been Andrew who's been like going, yeah, we're gonna put this one on. So maybe next year will be the year for Spirit of the Beehive.
Here comes 70s. I mean, 70s has such an amount of good movies. It's ridiculous. So here's to hoping.
All right, we're gonna take a short break. We'll be back talking Pather Panchali with Girish Shambu after this.
Hey Cinematariats, this is your co-host Lydia Creech with an important message during this break in the show. Cinematary would like you to know that we do not want your money, and we don't want to place ads in the show at this time either. That's not why we do this. We do it because we enjoy each other's company, and we want to bring you our pure, unadulterated opinions on the world of cinema. However, there are a few things you can do to help out the show that we would greatly appreciate. First, leave us a review on iTunes, 4 or 5 stars only, to help us reach more listeners per the algorithm gods. Secondly, send us a tweet at Cinematary, or better yet, send us an email at zach@cinematary.com. That's Zach, Z-A-C-H, so we can hear from you guys for a change. I'd especially like to hear if you're a human and not an android who also likes Blade Runner, or maybe you have a suggestion of a movie you would really like to hear our opinions on. Regardless, let us know your thoughts and we will read them out and respond to them on future episodes of the show. Finally, please share the show with friends and members of your family who you think would enjoy listening to and participating in our film discussions that we bring to you guys every week. So, to recap, review, send us your thoughts through Twitter and email, and please share with your friends and family. We would greatly appreciate it. Thanks for listening. Now back to the show.
And we are back with part 2 of episode 202 of Cinematary. In this part, we will be continuing our Young Critics Watch Old Movies series with 1955's Pather Panchali. And joining us today for the second time on the Cinematary podcast is Mr. Girish Shambu. Girish, thank you so much for coming back.
It's my pleasure. Thank you.
So, Pather Panchali, you wrote about it for the Criterion Collection a few years back. They put out the trilogy of Apu films, and I think like 2 or 3 years ago. This one is the first in the 3 films, and it is the debut film also of director Satyajit Ray. And pretty much the story is you have Apu who is living in this rural village. He has his father who is very he's dreaming of a better life for himself. He works as a priest and other odd jobs on the side, but spends a lot of time away from the home trying to make money. At home, Apu is there with his sister and his mother. His mother is much more in tune with the day-to-day struggles that her family is going through, and they also have an elderly aunt that lives with them. And the film over the 2 hours kind of chronicles, the small moments of this difficult point in their lives. This is my second time watching this movie, and I kind of got this feeling the first time, but the second time it really affirmed to me that honestly I feel like this is just like one of the great movies of all time. So Girish, I'm curious, when you first saw this film and kind of Rise trilogy as a whole, what struck you about it at first? What was so alluring about this body of work when you first saw it?
So I first watched these films as a teenager in India. I actually grew up all over India, but I spent many years in Calcutta, which is also the city where Ray was born and raised. And so even in his hometown, these films were very hard to see. There weren't very many good prints around. They were very hard to find, and they weren't screened very often. So I had to really wait to watch these films, even though I had read about them a lot in newspapers and magazines and so on. And I was just becoming a cinephile in my teens. And so when I finally saw them, they had a very powerful effect, partly because I'd been trying to see them for a few years and was unable to. And also because they were so different from everything else that was kind of being made at that time. So I think to me, probably the biggest thing that struck me at the time was that his film was so quiet. Like the current cinema, and in fact, you could say cinema in general, kind of privileges the word, it's like it draws so much from literature and from theater. And so cinema is so dialogue driven. And this film actually doesn't have that much dialogue in it. And so much of the story is told visually, audio visually, you can say, but without kind of words necessarily, sounds and images kind of power this film. And so that I found really striking, to the point that even to this day, I'm kind of partial towards films that tell a lot of their stories, that do their work through sounds and images, but not necessarily through a lot of words. And so it was a formative film for me that back then, because it kind of showed me the power of what I didn't know how to name it then, but what I would later discover to be mise en scène, So how films kind of compose images and tell you stories through images and sound design. So I think that's probably what struck me the most. And even to this day, some of my favorite filmmakers like Claire Denis or Kelly Reichardt, they kind of work in that mode where they don't have a lot of dialogue, but their images and sound design are really important.
Well, I think that's a great point, because I feel like that's the essence of cinema in a way, that you go away remembering the images and the sounds. And that's what's so effective about this film, is that there are these very, very emotional, very difficult scenes that you go through, but there's also these kind of moments of respite where for instance, the sister and brother are walking behind the man with the candy, and it has that shot in the river that's reversed as the music plays. You have her playing in the rain. You have these very kind of small moments that really are just really moving, very, very effective, and that kind of just feels like pure cinema in a way.
You're right. There is something very it's a very contentious topic, like what is the essence of cinema? Simply because cinema is this kind of synthetic art form made from all the previous art forms that came before it. So, one wonders, like, what is the essence of cinema? But I know for myself, I'm kind of drawn to this kind of poetic cinema that doesn't necessarily need a lot of words. This is not to say that I dislike films with a lot of words in them. There are filmmakers like Eric Romer or Richard Linklater, whose characters speak a lot and there's a lot of words in them, or Whit Stillman. I love those films too, but I'm kind of always partial to these films that do a lot of their work silently, or just with in a non-linguistic way.
Now, in your piece that you wrote for the Criterion Collection, you kind of put in perspective a little bit the place that Pather Panchali had in terms of kind of putting Indian cinema on the map in terms of waking up Western minds, it seems like, to it. Do you mind kind of elaborating a little bit on the impact of the film on both the Indian film industry, but also just how people in the West kind of perceived the cinema from that part of the world?
Sure, yeah. So India was kind of not on the Western cinematic map for a long time, even though movies came to India really early. So the Lumiere brothers films were actually shown in India in the late 19th century, soon after they were made. And there was a big silent film industry in India, and a thriving thriving sound film industry. There were big studios in the big cities of India. We had an industrial kind of structure to make movies in a prolific way. When Pather Panchali came out, India was the largest producer of films in the world. But, that really wasn't known outside of India very much. So the reigning kind of film at that time was made in Bombay, and you might call it was called the Bombay film. What we might call Bollywood today. And the Bombay film formula, there was a certain formula of a certain kind of film, and that Bombay film formula spread all over India so that all the other regions, India is a very, very heterogeneous place with multiple cultures and languages, and so that kind of spread all over India. And so the Bombay film formula was taken up all over India. And this formula was of kind of an all-inclusive entertainment, quote unquote, driven by stars and driven by genre, but not just a single genre. Each film was kind of a composite of multiple genres. So every film, had something for everyone. You had songs, and you had dances, and you had fights, and you had comedy scenes, and you had action, and you had romance, and you had all of this stuff together. And they were typically long films. And so this was the Bombay film formula that was taken up by all the other film industries, small industries in India, like the Bengali film industry, which was the immediate context for Ray's films. He was kind of making films against that context. And so these films are incredibly extravagant, very ebullient and just a maximalist, you could say. And so Pather Panchali is like a complete opposite of that kind of film. And also was made outside of the industrial context. Many call it the first indie film, the first independent film made in India outside of the industrial context. I'm sure that's said a bit loosely, because things were kind of in the silent film era. We didn't really have an established industry, but really it was the first kind of prominent indie film made in India. And so in that way, it was working against that industrial context. And Ray kind of knew what he was doing. And a few years before he made Pather Panchali, he wrote this really incredible polemical article, this essay that got a lot of controversy called "What is Wrong with Indian Films?" And so he basically attacked the commercial film industry for all the things that he thought were kind of crass and vulgar, and they were kind of perverting the essence of cinema. He didn't actually use these particular words, but this was kind of his message. And so you could kind of tell, kind of like some of the Cahiers du Cinema critics in France, 10 years later, he was setting the stage to make his own films, which would be totally opposite to the kind of films that he disliked. And
that's what I was about to say. That sounds very Truffaut-esque, but
yes.
it seems like maybe Truffaut and Godard and them were taking the lead from him.
I think there was a kind of example there, because this article came out in 1947, and then they started writing their polemical pieces just a few years after that. Now, I don't know if this article was available in France at the time, but it was written in English, because until 47, India was still under colonial rule. 47 is the year when India was kind of granted independence from Great Britain. So yeah, I'm not sure if Truffaut and Godard were aware of it, but this is kind of the context of where Ray was coming from. And so he made a film that was kind of realist, and it was understated. And it didn't really have a script. It had a bunch of drawings to start with. And so in all of these ways, it was completely the opposite of the kind of film that you were seeing in India at the time.
What kind of impact did this make on kind of Western audiences? Because it seemed like Ray was part of that group with Antonini and Kurosawa, where, the U.S. and Europe at large was kind of discovering these other directors who were doing this prolific work in places that they didn't really register as being hubs of cinema. What did this movie kind of make on that on the industry that most people would probably be most common with?
Yeah, it did have a huge impact. It won awards at film festivals and influenced a lot of directors, partly because there was something unique that Ray was bringing to the table at that time. And all of these directors, the people that you mentioned, for instance, were doing that too. Like with Kurosawa, he was like this real master of movement and choreography and action and editing. I mean, he could do many things, but he was particularly good at these things, better than, most directors working at that time. And Antonioni had his own thing going on. He had this visionary kind of style with long takes, and it was this like post-neorealist sensitivity to like space and, things like that, and alienation. So Antonioni had his own thing that he was doing. And with Ray, I would say, if I were to say what was unique about him, he brought a certain like lyrical humanism to cinema. And so like this poetic lyrical quality could be seen in almost every single scene of a Ray film. And the humanism could be seen as something that maybe descended a little bit from Renoir. So Ray was a huge fan of Jean Renoir. Renoir made a great film about India called The River in 1950. And when he went to Calcutta to scout locations for The River, Ray, who had actually helped start the Calcutta Film Society a couple of years earlier, Ray was a huge cinephile. And so he met Renoir, and he helped Renoir scout for locations during that time. And he saw The Southerner by Renoir, one of Renoir's Hollywood films, and he actually loved The Southerner. And he said something like, there were two great things that I discovered in The Southerner that changed my entire vision of cinema. One of them was that characters didn't have to be black and white. They could be gray. You could have a person be terrible, but also be sympathetic and good and generous at the same time. And he said the other thing was the power of location shooting and finding accidentally, certain qualities in location that you could not really find in a studio. And so these two things really made a huge mark on Ray. And so I think Ray really put his own spin on Renoir's humanism, but I think Ray has kind of that lyrical humanism, and he thanks Renoir a little bit for that. So I would say that is Ray's mark, and there's a certain understatement to Ray that was also maybe part of his unique signature. And honestly, even today, I see his influence in directors like Nanni Moretti's The Sun's Room. It's a wonderful film about dealing with a child's death that he made in the early 2000s that won the Palme d'Or. So I see Ray in that. Some of James Ivory's films like Howard's End or Remains of the Day. Whit Stillman, Richard Linklater, they may not directly be influenced by Ray, but I see a kind of generosity towards people there, like Stillman. He can critique characters, but he can also make them appealing and interesting and have positive qualities. And so there's a certain generosity towards people that comes through in Ray's cinema that I also see in the cinema of these other directors.
I also feel like exactly what you're describing is something that has led to a lot of critical minds and people who talk about Ray labeling him as being universal, that these films kind of transcend just India and speak to the world at large, and can, even people in Kansas can relate to this movie, even though they may not recognize the locations and everything. And it seemed like that was something that you felt like was a little bit misguided. A little in your piece you seem to push back on that a little bit. What do you make of that claim that he kind of has this universal appeal? Is that necessarily a bad thing?
Okay. Yes, in the essay that I wrote for Criterion, this does bug me. The fact that this universalism claim is made so often with Ray, and I'll tell you why. On the one hand, I think we share a lot in common. Human beings share a lot in common, no matter where they are, and especially now when we look around the world, we find certain problems all around the world. Right? I mean, patriarchy. No society, no culture in the history of civilization has been non-patriarchal. Pretty much every society has had men dominate over women. You've had inequality right now all over the world. Immigrants are suffering all over the world. So there's universal experiences that we're seeing, and I think that's very important to know and to recognize and to act on. At the same time, I get a little bit suspicious when people make excessive claims of universalism because, and this was done with Ray, like Robin Wood and Pauline Kael both claimed Ray as a universal filmmaker, and many other film critics have claimed him as a universal filmmaker, which is true, but only to a point. Race films have kind of a deceptive accessibility, I would say. Like you said, they could be loved in Kansas or in New York City or in France or in Japan, and that's a wonderful thing, but it can be both a blessing and a curse, I think, because sometimes when something comes too easily, when something is accessed too easily, something is also lost there. I think when a work resists a little bit, or when a work is a little bit hard to completely apprehend, I think it makes us do some productive work. So incomprehension or uncertainty can be important things that allow us to that friction can be an important thing that allows us to basically think about a work and work a little bit to try and understand where it's coming from. And I feel that Western critics take Ray a little bit too easily for granted. So I can explain this a little bit. So Western critics, and some scholars have made this argument, that Western critics really seem invested in Ray, and that's a problem for two reasons, I would say. The first reason is Ray reinforced in Pather Panchali and the Apu trilogy certain prejudices that Westerners had about India, especially India being one of the poorest countries on earth and poverty being all around you. And so as long as Ray was making films about poor people, it seemed like everybody wanted to embrace him as a universal filmmaker. But then Ray didn't always make films about poor people. A few years later, he was making films about middle-class people and rich people. And at that time, he somehow became mysteriously non-universal, And so, in a weird way, Western critics wanted his films to confirm their own ideas of what India was, but Ray didn't want to do that. And so that's one problem. The other problem is, and Ray is partly responsible for this, Ray's own statements about his own cinema have been kind of a little bit ambivalent, because on the one hand, he, extols Western cinema. Like his great and early influences were Chaplin and Keaton and Griffith and Lubitsch and Renoir, and Bicycle Thieves, which is a very important film for him. The moment he saw it, he said, I want to make a film exactly the way this film was made. So these are all important influences for him. But on the other hand, Ray was hugely into Indian culture. He came from a family steeped in culture. There was a printing press in his house. His grandfather founded one of the most famous Bengali kids magazines that his father then edited, and then Ray himself then edited. It was a magazine called Sandesh. And so he was steeped in Bengali culture. And so he was kind of he had it, he was very good at both, or he knew both with great dexterity. He had a knowledge of both. And so it seems like sometimes Western critics don't quite give him the credit for cultural specificity that I feel like they should. And that's what ultimately bugs me a little bit. They kind of stop short of being truly curious about all his roots. And that's why I want to push back a little bit against this universalist claim.
That's funny, too, especially as you say that in his later movies, like Big City and Hero, that their characters a lot of times will fall back and forth between their native language and English back and forth. And just in that, you can see tension that might not be there if it's just them setting in the local village that the Apu trilogy starts out in.
That's a great example. That example shows you right there. Pather Panchali doesn't trouble that. It feels like it's purely exotic. It's in a rural location. You're right. It doesn't pose that problem that the other films do.
Now, kind of zeroing in on the film, you mentioned some before, but are there any kind of moments or performances by the many non-professional actors that are in the movie that kind of stick out to you as truly memorable? I can think of a few, but I would love to hear if you had any that really stick out to you.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. In terms of a moment, I mean, it's full of so many lovely understated moments, but maybe if I can pick one, the scene where Durga leads Apu to this remote field, and there's this white grass growing. It's called kash in Bengali, and it's kind of waving in the wind, and the air is silent. It's still, and the clouds are above, and they're waiting for something, and you don't know what it is. The light is wonderful at that time, at that moment in the late afternoon. And then a train roars by, and it's Apu's first glimpse of a train. And that whole moment is just wonderful. I don't think there's any words or hardly any words spoken during that scene. But it's fascinating because it's kind of both looking backwards and forwards for me. Backwards because it's about tuning into nature and being kind of at one with nature in a very peaceful way, meditative way. But it's also looking ahead to modernity, coming to India, and Apu's first kind of brush with modernity in the form of this, incredible spectacle of the train kind of, running through the landscape. And so that moment is beautiful, but there's so many other moments that one could cite. And in terms of performance, I have a special fondness for the old lady, the aunt, played by Chunibala Devi, and she was in her 80s, and she'd never been in a film before. And Ray found her living in a red light district in Calcutta and persuaded her to come to the village and play this part. And she agreed under the condition that Ray would procure for her daily dose of opium in the morning, without which she could not work. And so one day, he couldn't find the opium that she needed, and apparently she fainted on set, and she couldn't carry on. And so she's just such an interesting character, and just her face, her body, her expressions, her voice. She's just amazing. I'm thinking this is what cinema can do. It can go to the ends of the world and find somebody like this and make them so vivid. So that she's a small miracle for me in that film.
He seems so tuned into her over the course of the film. I just know some scenes early on when you kind of first meet her, and she's speaking with the mother, and the camera seems, the way it follows her around, it seems like Ray is very aware of what's so lively about her personality.
Yes, I think also Ray being young and making his first feature film and not being that experienced, I think he was pretty amazed by this woman's kind of history and her life force and how eccentric she was. And so I think it was a personal experience, a profound experience for him, from what I've read, finding her and persuading her to come to this village and then working with her. So I think you're absolutely right.
I was just about to pretty much agree, because when she dies and her passing follows her singing that tune that she sung before, like a very sorrowful, lamenting thing about basically not having any money and pretty much dying alone and by yourself. It really creates an absence during the second half of the movie that I can really very powerful.
I absolutely agree with you. It's interesting. I'm not sure if both of you have seen. There's another important kind of Bengali film made around this time called The Cloud-Capped Star by Ghatak, the other great Bengali filmmaker who's very different from Ray in many ways, very productive contrast with him. And you see a similar theme there, which is, when you have deprivation, like economic deprivation, it deforms people. It turns people, it makes ordinary people cruel. And that's kind of what you see with the wife in this, with Sarbajaya, with the wife, Apu's mother, who treats the old woman so poorly, partly because she is responsible for, providing for the household when her husband is missing for months at a time, looking for work. And so she's kind of, she's not inherently a bad person, but it's just she's kind of struggling to make ends meet, and she prioritizes her children's needs over that of the aunt, and it's heartbreaking. And you see something similar happening also in The Cloud-Capped Star. And so to me, it's also like a critique of I don't know, economic conditions under colonialism as well, because the film is based on a series of stories that were written in the 20s and set in the 20s. And so I think that's also in there, this kind of economic critique and how it can, if people are not just inherently good or bad, the structures around us, like the economic structures, the racial structures, the social structures make us so. So that's kind of an interesting thing there.
Early on, too, to your point, that it seemed like such a small moment, but I think it sets a tension between the family that we follow and their neighbors, is that apparently they used to own that orchard that Durga keeps stealing fruit from, and it was basically given away to pay a family debt that apparently the brother owed money to that family. And so, I mean, they would lament the loss of having that property of an orchard, right? So the whole time, the mother thinks of what they could have had if they held on to the orchard.
Right, exactly. And this is a very common kind of story. And even like having a piece of fruit stolen could make somebody really mean and could foster hatred. And so I grew up with a lot of this, growing up in a lower middle class family in India. And I still remember my parents cautioning me, don't trust anyone, and everybody wants something from you, and don't give anything to anybody. Never give anything to somebody who's begging. And, all of these things that I now cringe at when I think back to the kind of advice that was given to me. I'm not blaming my family. I'm also saying the kind of deprivation that you grow up in also makes you a little bit small-minded and petty and mean. And, it's the structures around you that kind of create the kind of conditions to kind of make you a little bit less than human, Mm-hmm. And so I could totally relate to that. Just losing a piece of fruit would be enough for somebody to be mean to you and to hate you and to yell at you. And so all of these things that I envied the West not having to deal with when I romanticized the West when I lived in India. But of course, now we know, the U.S. has been declared a third world country by the United Nations. And, we have levels of poverty and inequality here that are catastrophic. And so this is everywhere now.
It kind of made me a little grumpy, the moment at the end, but I appreciate it now as I think about it. When the neighbor comes and gives the mangoes, and as the movie helps with a moment of realization that, as they're leaving, how mean and petty she was being to her neighbors the whole time. And that was pretty surprising and effective, as a tail end moment to everything that just happened.
That's totally true. And again, that's kind of for me like the Renoirian touch, without that woman would have been a villain, would not have anything redeeming about her. But Ray wouldn't leave it that way. Renoir, for instance, wouldn't leave it that way. And so it makes it's a greater realism, and that's where his humanism and his generosity kind of comes in as a filmmaker. That's a very touching moment. And I think Ray's filmography is full of those kinds of moments where you can't peg somebody completely until the film is over. And then you have a kind of a complicated picture of who they are.
The one performance I always think of, and we've already mentioned her a little bit, is the performance by Durga, who is Apu's sister. Umas Dasgupta plays her, and she never acted in anything again after this role, but the performance is so profound and so natural. What do you make of that as you're watching this kind of one-time performance by this actress?
Yeah, I mean, it's incredible. On the one hand, having grown up in Calcutta, I just know that she captures a certain kind of everyday presence and kind of everyday being, like the person next door kind of being. And so to me, immediately right off the bat, there's a certain authenticity about her that moves me very much. But also other things like the way she inhabits the character of Durga. And Durga is like this wild, free spirit. She steals fruit. She steals other things. I don't want to spoil it for people who haven't seen the film yet. She's very mischievous, but she's also, and this, I love this, she's also a kind of a guide and a protector and a mentor and teacher to Apu, her younger brother. Apu is ironically the protagonist of the film, and in some way, but actually the less interesting person, the less interesting character. Durga is definitely more interesting, and also there's, like, for me, for the feminist in me, it's a wonderful, like, inversion of gender norms there, because India is one of the worst, most patriarchal societies. By worst, I mean most patriarchal societies in the world. And so it kind of inverts those norms. And so it's the woman who kind of is the initiator, the leader, the teacher, the more experienced one, and ultimately suffers, alas, a fate, a bad fate in the film. So that I find very, very moving. It's kind of counter to gender norms in India. So for all of these reasons, it's an incredibly poignant role and performance.
Yeah, adding to kind of the feminist angle, one of the things that struck me the second time watching it was her kind of reaction to the friend that she had who was who was being arranged to be married, and her kind of brushing off of, the friend kept going, oh, well, this will happen to you, and she's like, oh no, I don't see that happening at all, and then she goes to the actual ceremony of the wedding, and there's this shot where you just kind of have a close up on her face, and it looks like she's kind of faintly crying, but you can just feel the processing, the emotions processing as she's taking in this very emotional scene, but you can feel the distance that she has from this whole act, that this seems like something that she's not going to be able to ever engage in.
Yes, that's actually very astute observation, I think. And to me, it also comes back to the kind of critique of poverty and economic conditions and colonialism and so on. Colonialism is not mentioned specifically, but of course you would have to know about it, when the film was set and so on. So yeah, I think that's very important. At the time, if somebody bet on their own fate being a grim one, they would win, I mean, odds were that your fate would be a grim one. Only that it was an exception to transcend a grim fate. And so you can see that in her face. And so to me, that really is very moving. Yeah, you're absolutely right.
I feel like there's a thread in there too of a melancholy of her losing a friend, because it seemed like that was the main girl she was playing with and interacting with throughout. And so in that moment, it's both, oh, I'm not going to be able to get married for X and Y reasons, and I'm losing a friend.
Yes.
So I have to be happy for her, but I'm also losing a friend. So
right. And in kind of a collectivist, I would say a communally oriented society like India's, I think that is particularly important. Friendships are particularly important. This is a short story I share with a lot of my friends, American friends here in the U.S. But in India, often friends don't make plans. Like, they don't say, okay, let's meet, let's do something at 4 p.m. tomorrow. They just come over, they just pop over and they knock on the door, and then you're expected to drop what you're doing and to just go out and have a drink or whatever. So people take you for granted in a way that my American friends don't do that as much, because it's a more individualistic kind of society here.
That's funny that you mentioned that, because that just made me think of the scene early on in the film when Apu goes to school and the guy is there, and the teacher in one is selling the rice or the noodles or whatever, and he's also teaching class, and then the other guy comes in and starts talking about the traveling actors, and so you have that conversation going on while he's selling the things, and he's also yelling at the different students to focus. And there's just so many different lines of communication going on all at the same time. He just drops in on that class.
I know, that's a great example. That's true. I mean, can you imagine somebody walking into a classroom today and going, hey, I just want to chat with you. And the teacher will be like, I'm teaching a class right now. What are you doing here? Get out of here. And so that would never happen. But
he just totally picks natural. Up on he just goes, oh, yeah, let's talk about this. The kids can wait. I'd be remiss not to mention before we end talking a little bit about the music in this film. Ravi Shankar does the music for this and the rest of the trilogy. What kind of impact does the music make for you? Because it seems to breathe so much of the magic and life into the story as this kind of thing that still kind of happens in the background.
Yeah, the music, yes, as you say, is super important in this film. And Ravi Shankar, of course, went on to fame, embraced by the hippies, in the U.S. in the 60s and so on. But Ray himself, and I didn't get a chance to mention this, Ray himself was a polymath. He could do all kinds of things. He wrote short stories. He composed music. He was a great artist. He was a painter. He did all of these things. And so he's very sensitive to music, and he was very sensitive to who he would pick, what kind of music he would pick. And he was also influenced by Tagore, who was also a musician. And Ray attended a college that was founded by Tagore, called Shantiniketan, which is in the rural area of Bengal. So music was very important to him there as well when he was attending this kind of rural college. So Ray had a special ear for music. And so I think you're absolutely right. The music is very important in this film, and it lends a certain, not only a melancholy and a poetic feeling, but also a kind of sense of cultural otherness and a certain cultural authenticity for somebody who knows Bengal. So I think the choice of music is very important in the film too.
I want to go back to a moment that you spoke of that stuck out to you with the train, because I think in terms of music and also sound design in that movie, that really sticks out to my mind for sure, where it's just kind of this ominous music of Durga taking Apu into the field outside of their house. And it's a lot of the movie just really uses drums solo by itself to like really unnerve. Yeah. And in that moment, it's like building up to the train coming swooshing in, the thing that Apu kept mentioning that he wants to see for himself, and was trying to get someone to promise to take him to go see it. And in that moment, it was just like a tense breath letting out when the train shows up. And the train itself, like a part of sound design in this, and also in Unvanquished, the next movie in the trilogy, is just like such a source of anxiety for me to like hear it in the background, that like just about every time like a conversation between the mother and Harihar, the father, talk together at night, the train just kind of starts sweeping in the background, and you're just like, oh God, are they actually going to leave? Are they going to stay there? Even though it kind of is rough and they probably should go to Calcutta. And it's just, yeah, that with the music, it just very, very anxious. But then you get moments like when good news comes and there's like this water montage of insects playing on the ponds that kind of shows like a moment of peace with the sitar coming in, and it's very playful.
True. And to add to the train thing, of course, there's in the third film, there's like a possible suicide attempt on the train track, which also associates trains, with foreboding in the trilogy.
Well, Girish, thank you so much for coming on and talking with us.
Well, this was an absolute pleasure, and I love this series, and I can't wait to go back and like listen to the archive of this series where you talk about older films. I didn't know about it until recently, so I can't wait to catch up.
We got some good ones. I'll toot my own horn. All right, that will wrap up this episode of Cinematary. You can find us on Facebook at facebook.com/cinematary, on Twitter at @cinematary, and on Letterboxd at letterboxd.com/cinematary, where we post all the movies that we talked about in this episode. Next week, we'll be continuing our Young Critics Watch Old Movies series with a look at 1974. I'm looking now, guys. 1964's Dog Star Man. We're going to get a little avant-garde. This is all Nathan's fault. I don't know what to tell you guys. I don't know what we're getting into. But yeah, we got that. It's gonna be an interesting one. Make sure to go to cinematary.com. Jessica has a review of Tampopo up there. Lots of other good stuff. If you missed some of the reviews from the past few weeks, they are there. So please check it out. We're gonna be having some video essays coming up, so that's gonna be cool to see. You can find that on the website. But yeah, until next week, thank you guys for listening. All right. Thanks again, everybody, for listening. I wanted to take one final moment to remind you to check out Audible and get a free 30-day free trial just for being a listener of Cinematary. You can start your trial by going to www.audibletrial.com/cinematary and picking through over 180,000 titles that can be accessed from your iPhone, your Android, your Kindle, or even your MP3 player. Again, that link is www.audibletrial.com/cinematary. See you next week.